In this video, I want to share with you my game development adventure with Unity. Currently, I am interested into the game development. My goal is to learn what process of developing a game is like. While doing this, I want to have fun, create a community or be known within a community in this field, turn game development into a profession, and exchange information with people related to game development. In this video, I developed a 2D platform game. Of course, this is not an original work. This game includes the Taiwanese section, which is the fifth section of the Learn Unity in C# and Code You First file to the video games course that I purchased on Udemy. I will not publish it commercially as it is against copyright anyway. If I prepare my own portfolio site in the future, I plan to publish the playable version there. I think that by uploading this video to YouTube, your reactions and comments will contribute to my adventure becoming a game developer. If you are ready, let's see how to develop a 2D game. I created a new 2D project called Platform Game. I moved the sprites folder to the assets folder in the project section. You can access the sprites folder from the assets compressed file in the description section of the video. I selected all the sprites in the sprites folder and set the pixels per unit value in the inspector to 32. Thus, sprites appeared larger on the screen. I made the sprite mode multiple sprite blocks in the SPA Rock Grace water sprite. I opened the sprite editor. I clicked on the slice section at top left and type automatic was selected. I pressed the stylus button at the bottom and the blocks in the sprites were divided into separate slices. After I was done, I closed the sprite editor. Now, when I click on the arrow sign on the right side of the sprite, I can access the partitioned parts and add them to the scene section. I deleted the pieces I added from the hierarchy. This time I do same process for the SPA player sprite. However, here I select the grid by cell size section from the slice section. I set pixel size to 32 and paddings to 6. The reason I do this is to make animations work properly. I multiplied the background, coins and enemies sprite mode. I opened the background sprite editor and made automatic slice. I opened the coins sprite editor. Select slice as grid by cell size. Pixel size was set to 32 and padding was set to 6. I opened the enemy sprite editor and selected slice by grid by cell size, but the sprites didn't fit exactly into the frame, so I changed the offset values. I created tilemap from the hierarchy named Platforms Tilemap. I changed the grid to tilemap grid. I created a folder called Tiles. I clicked on the tile palette from the window to the end, placed the resulting tile palette window between the scene and the hierarchy. I created tilemap named Platforms Tilemap from the tile palette window. After doing this, a prefab named Platforms Tilemap was created in the Tiles folder. I selected all the selected sprites in the rock, grass, water sprite sheet and dragged and dropped them onto the Platforms Tilemap in the tile palette. While the brush is selected in the tile palette, I can transfer the section I select on the tile scene section as a wish. If we select the eraser on the tilemap, we can delete the sprites associated with the Platforms Tilemap on the scene screen. To move the sprites, we select the ones we want to move with the select tool. Then we select the move tool and move them where we want. If the type of sprite we want is not available in the tilemap, we can derive the sprites from existing ones. To do this, we first need to turn on the edit mode in the tile palette. For example, the sprites we will use while testing the platform here do not have right paths. To do this, I selected the sprites on the left, copied them with the eyedrop, past them, opposite them. Then selected the blocks on the right and set value to -1 in the scale section in the inspector. Using these features, I arranged the sprites that I would use when creating our platform. Using the features I just explained about tilemap, I created the platform on which the player can move on the scene. I created a tilemap called background tilemap. I made active tilemap into background tilemap. I selected all the sprites on the background spreadsheet and dragged them to the background tilemap. From the add tag, I specified two layers named sorting layers, platforms, and background. I assigned the background layer to the platforms and background to the platform tilemap sorting layers in the tilemap renderer. Again, from the add tag, I came to the sorting layers section and placed the background at the bottom and the platform at the top. Using the features I just explained, this time I created a tilemap called water tilemap and positioned it on the background under the platforms as a sorting layer. I will use this tilemap in the feature to reduce the health of the player when he falls into water. We can tie this to certain rules to build the platform faster. For example, our job will be easier if we determine from the beginning which sprites will come to the right and left sections or corners and when random sprites will be used. To do this, we first need to download and install the tilemap extras package. I added the rule type from create to the tiles. I changed the name to rule tile. In order to see the rule type on the tilemap, I added a sprite to the default sprite section in the inspector and then drag and drop the rule tile onto the tilemap. Let's talk a little about the use of the rule tile. We can add a new sprite by clicking the plus button in the inspector. Here, there is a space of 9 squares between the sprite and the section to which we assign the values. By clicking on the squares, we can adjust where we want the sprite to be displayed. For example, in the section where the green arrow is located, the sprite will not appear. The sprites above it or the default sprite will appear. Or we make X, the opposite will happen. For example, I want to add a corner sprite. For this, it would be enough to put an X in the upper left corner and replace the point in the middle with an arrow rotating clockwise. If you make the correct settings as seen here, the corner sprite will even adjust its direction and appear in the position we want. Here I set which sprite can appear on the right and left edges. Here I set which sprites should appear on the type edge. I selected random from the output, set size to 5 and drag the sprite into the array consisting of this number. Now these sprites are placed randomly on the top edge. Let me also talk about noise here. We can also change the random distribution frequency of these 5 sprites using noise. Using this information, I edited the rule tile as you see on the screen. You can access the image file regarding the settings I made from the compressed file in the description section of the video. I deleted the space I had previously placed on the screen using a tilemap and drew a platform on the screen using the sprite connected to the newly created rule tile. Now when creating a platform, I no longer have to worry about which sprite to put where, because rule tile does it all for me. I created an empty object named player. I created a folder called animations. I created an animation controller named player in this folder. I came to the player object and added a component called animator from the inspector. I just created the controller assigned to the player animation controller. I chose the player sprite sheet. I chose the sprites from 5 to 8. I created animation by clicking. I wrote the name of the animation I created as idling. Then I moved this animation to the animation folder. I added the sprite render component to the player and assigned the 19th sprite as a sprite. I created a sorting layer called player and placed it on top of all layers. I made the player sorting layer from the sprite render of the player and the player object became visible. I added the animator window from the window to the right of the project section. Then I clicked on the player animation controller. Animations for this controller became visible in the animator section. I dragged and dropped the idling animation here. Then I marked the loop time in the idling inspector so that the animation could repeat its steps continuously. When I started the game, I saw that the animation worked properly. I selected Splash 19 to 28 on the player's splash sheet, created an animation called running, and moved this animation to the animations folder. I moved the running animation to the player's animation controls. I created a transition between idling and running. I selected transition, removed the has exit time from the settings section in the inspector, and set the exit time duration to 0. In the parameters section of the animator, I created a bool type parameter called isRunning. I set isRunning as a condition in transition. This time I created a new transition from running to the idling. I made the same settings. The only difference from the other one was that the value of isRunning was set to false. I set the loop time of the running animation to true. Now, when you set is running in the animator to true during gameplay, the player's running animation starts, and when you set it to false, it stops. If we select the running animation in the animator and increase the speed value in the inspector, the player will start running faster. This time I selected the 14th and 15th sprites on the player's sprite sheet, created an animation called climbing and moved it to the animations folder. I transferred climbing to animator created to transition as in running and entered the same settings into settings. This time I created a new parameter called isClimbing. From idling to climbing is true. I gave false value to one from climbing to idling. I set the climbing in loop time to true. I reduced the climbing speed a bit. I added the tilemap collider to the and composite collider to the platform's tilemap. Rigid body was automatically added. I made the body type static because I wanted the platform's tilemap to remain constant during physical interaction with other objects. And for the collider to surround the platform, I choose the used by composite value in tilemap collider 2D. In this way, the player will not get stuck in the unwanted places while on the platform. Now I see that when I edit the platform with the sprites in the platform tilemap with rule tiles, the collider is shaped accordingly. I added capsule collider to the player and edit the collider with edit collider. I added rigid body to the I made a freeze rotation of Z from the constraints so that the direction of the player doesn't change in any situation and remains constant. I installed the input system from package manager. I added the player input component to player. I created the input system from player input create actions. From here we can see or customize which actions or methods are assigned to which case. I created an action called jump from the input system. Determined that this action would work with the keyboard and mouse and assigned the space key to it. After making the necessary scripts and settings in the future, the player will be able to jump when the space key is pressed. I opened Open Input Settings from Player Input and pressed the Create Input Assets button. I move the resulting input settings file to the input system folder. After making this setting, we will be able to use the actions in the input system as script methods and run the command we want when the button linked to the action is pressed. I created a folder called scripts and inside it, I created a script called player movement and assigned this script to the player object as a component. I opened the player movement script. I created an object called movement of type vector2. I created the onMove method, which has a parameter of type input value. It corresponds to the method connected to the input system that I just showed. When the arrow keys are pressed, the commands are executed. In this method, I transferred the vector2 value that I can with the value parameters to move input and print it on the screen with debug.log. When I run the game and press the arrow keys, I can see the data I wrote with debug.log on the console. In the player movement script, I called the rigid body of the player object to which it's connected. I created a method called run and called this method in update. Int run my rigid body velocity equals move input I wrote. When I switch the game mode, the player moves in the direction I want, but it moves as if it were floating in the air, which I do not want. What I want is for it to move only left and right, touching the platform. To do this, add vector2 player velocity equals new vector move input dot x 0f. I am writing thus the player can only move in the x-axis. When it comes to game mode, I see that now the player can only move left and right. I create a float variable called run speed. I gave the value 10 as the default. I wrote it right of move input with multiplication sign in between. I deleted the 0f in the second parameter in the vector 2 and wrote my rigid body velocity.y instead. Now I see that the player is not suspended in the air, but can move on the platform as I wish, and in the direction I want by pressing the left and right buttons. I created a method called flipSprite in the player movement script and called it in update. Inside the flipSprite method, transform.localScale equals new vector2 modf.sign my rigid body velocity x1f I wrote. The reason why I use modf.sign here is that if the value entered into this function is 0 or greater, it produces 1, and if it's less than 0, it produces -1. In this way, the player can change direction when pressing the arrow keys. Do not write met.sign instead of modf.sign here. It may be a bit of a problem. One problem I need to fix here is that even though the player flips while pressing the keyboard keys, it returns to its previous position when I remove my finger from the key. What I need to do for this is, I'm going back to the player movement script again. Bool player has horizontal speed equals modf.abs my rigid body velocity x greater than modf.epsilon. I write the line. What I do here is to set the player has horizontal speed value to true when positive or negative movement is greater than a value very close to 0, otherwise false. I put the transform.local scale line I just wrote into the if block. Now when the movement ends, the player stays in the direction he was in last. We will run the animations we previously created in the animator controller depending on a certain condition. For example, the running animation will be activated when the player is running, or the climbing animation will be activated while climbing the stairs. For this, I came to the player movement script and I added the my animator. I wrote my animator equals get component animator in start method. In the run method, I wrote my animator.setBool is running true. I came to game mode. When I pressed the arrow keys, the player's running animation became active. However, when I took my finger off the keys, the running animation continued. To solve this problem, I copied the bool player has horizontal speed equals mod f ABS line that I wrote in flip sprite and moved to the run method. I wrote the player has horizontal speed variable to the second parameter of my animator setBool, and now animation was working as I wanted. I added the onJump method to the player movement script. This jump method depends on the jump action and I defined in the input system before. I create the jump speed variable into if value dot is pressed, my reach body dot velocity plus equals new vector 2 0f jump speed I wrote. When I went into the game mode and pressed the space key, the player moved up. Here, when the player is jumping, his fall is very slow, as if he were an astronaut jumping on the moon. To fix this, I set the gravity scale on the player rigid body to 2. As can be seen, the player cannot jump enough to cross the platform. To solve this, I set the player gravity scale to 8 and the jump speed to 20. Another problem that needs to be solved here is that the player may sometimes fall off platform while jumping. To solve this, I set the collision detection in rigid body to continuous. As seen here, the player continues to jump while pressing the spacebar while in the air. What I want is for the jumping event to occur only when the player touches the platform. For this, I create a layer called ground and assign it to the platform's tile map. I opened the script, created the my capsule collider variable and called its component in the start method. Into onJump if my capsule collider dot is touching layer mask dot get mask ground return I wrote. I went to game mode and the player could now jump only when touching the platform but couldn't jump while in the air. I also noticed that the player's jump speed was insufficient, so I increased it from 20 to 25. I created a tile map called climbing tile map and set the layer and sorting layer as climbing. I transferred the ladder sprite from the sprite to the tile palette. While the active tile map was a climbing tile map, I drew the ladder in the scene section. First of all, I changed the physics shape of the ladder sprite in the sprite editor so that the player couldn't clip outside the edges of the ladder. Then I added tile map and composite collider. In the player movement script, I created a variable called climb speed and a method called climb ladder. Into this method, if my capsule collider dot is touching layer mask get mask climbing return vector 2 player velocity equals new vector 2 my rigid body dot velocity dot x move input dot y climb speed I wrote. I went to game mode and started it, but when the player touched the ladder fell over. To fix this, I made but type of climbing tile maps rigid body static and the tile map collider is triggered. Then I went to game mode and the player could now climb stairs. But when I took my finger off the button, it started to descend slowly. We will solve this problem in the future. To solve the problem of sliding down stairs that I mentioned before, I created a variable called gravity scale at start, and in the start method I wrote gravity scale start equals my rigid body dot gravity scale. In the if block inside the climb ladder method, at my rigid body gravity scale equals gravity scale at start, and end of the method my rigid body gravity scale equals 0f. I am writing. When I switch to game mode, I noticed that player no longer slides on stairs. I want the climbing animation I created before to work while climbing stairs. To do this, add my animator setBool is climbing false, and at the end of method, my animator setBool is climbing true. And in game mode, the animation works when the player is on the stairs, and when he moves away from the stairs, the animation stops. Another problem here is that when I release my finger from the button while the player is on the stairs, the animation continues to work. I want to stop and start again when I press the button. For this, on the animator the setBool line I wrote below, at bool player has vertical speed equals mat f ABS, my rigid body velocity y greater than met f epsilon, I wrote it, and transferred the player has vertical speed variable to second parameter of my animator set bool. I switched to game mode and so that the animation worked as I wanted. I imported the Cinemation package. I added a virtual camera to the Cinemation from the hierarchy. I named follow camera and positioned it under the main camera. I made the body a framing transposer and assigned the player to the follow volume. I see that the camera now follows the player. I changed the depth zone with height and Y damping settings from the body. I have prepared a platform as you can see on the screen. We will design the levels accordingly in the future. I added the polygon collider to the background time map and placed the boundaries of the collider on the edge of the game map. I added a layer called player to player and background to background time map. In project settings, I removed the interaction of the background with other layers from the matrix in Physics Studio. I select the follow camera, added confiner from the extension section at bottom and drag the background time map to the bounding shape studio. As I see in the game mode, Cinemation confiner now works properly. I added a state-driven camera from hierarchy, put it into the camera object, made the follow camera a sub-object of the state-driven camera. Name it run camera, duplicate it and name the other one idle camera. I changed the ortho size of the idle camera. I came to state driven camera. I added the animated target player. I added two states. In the first one, I select state in idling and camera idle camera, and in the other one, I selected state running and camera run camera. When I went to game mode, I switched to camera run camera when I was running and idle camera when I stopped. You can create various effects when switching between cameras. After creating an asset from custom lens, we can determine how long it will take to switch from which camera, and we can also change type of effect from the default blend. Another thing is that the amount of time we can wait while moving from one state to another is as long as the value will enter into wait. Using this information, I also added a ladder camera. Now different camera settings come into play when the player climbs the stairs. I opened the sprite editor and shaped the physics shape of the mushroom sprite with custom physics shape. I created a time map called bouncing time map. I added time map and composite collider to it. I set the body type of rigid body to static. I transferred the mushroom sprite to tile palette. I created a layer called bouncing. I set the layer of the bouncing time map as bouncing. I made the sorting layer platforms from tile map renderer. Then in the scene section, I placed the mushroom on the screen with the bouncing tile map selected in the tile palette. I created a folder called materials and created a physics materials studio called bouncy bounce in it. I set the bounce value of bouncy bounce material 1.5 and moved this material to material value in the tilemap collider of the bouncing tilemap. I ran the game and saw that the player could jump when he fell on the mushroom. I created a material called no friction, set the friction value to 0 and added it to the player's capsule collider. Now the player doesn't get stuck on the wall when pressing the button. I added box collider to the player. The point we need to consider here is that the width of the box collider is shorter than the capsule collider. I opened player movement script and transferred box collider I had just created to script, naming it my feet collider. In the on-jump and climb ladder methods, I replaced my body collider that I written before with my feet collider. I went to game mode and saw that the player can no longer jump while touching the wall. I created a new object. I named it the enemy. I added the sprite renderer. I added the first sprite of the enemy sprite sheet as a sprite. I created the enemy's layers in sorting layer and positioned it under the player. Then I changed enemies sorting layer to enemies. Now I can see the enemy's object. I added rigid body to enemy. I make the body type kinematic. I added capsule collider and just adjusted its size according to the enemy. I selected all the sprites on the enemy sprite sheet and created an animation. I named it enemy. I moved this animation to the animations folder. I marked the loop time so that animation constantly repeats itself. I created an animation controller called enemy. I added the animator component to the enemy object. I moved the enemy controller. I just created this controller section. I turned on game mode and the enemy's animation was working as I wanted. I created a script called enemy movement. I added this to the enemy object as a component. I opened the script. I called rigid body. In the update method, I wrote a command to move the velocity of the rigid body up the move speed in the X direction. When I switched to game mode, I saw that the enemy was advancing at the speed I wanted. I added enemy box collider, marked its trigger and formatted it as seen in the video. I opened the enemy movement script and added on trigger exit method and put move speed equals minus move speed I wrote. I opened game mode. I saw that when game enemy reached the edges, it started go in the opposite direction. I created a new layer called enemies. I assigned this layer to enemy object. I made sure that this layer interacts only with ground and player in physics 2D. I created a method called flip enemy facing in the enemy movement script. I wrote transform local scale equals new vector 2 minus matf sin my rigid body velocity x. I called this method in on trigger exit. When I opened the game mode, I saw that the enemy changed its direction as I wanted when it came to H. I defined a boolean variable name is alive in the player movement script. I set initial value to true. I wrote if is alive return for the update on move on jump methods. Thus, when is alive is false, the commands in this method will not work. I created a method called die. Put if my body collider is touching layers must get mask enemies is alive equals false. I wrote. I called this method in update. Thus, the player became uncontrollable as soon as it touched the enemy. I created an animation called that from 10th, 11th, and 12th sprites of the player's sprite sheet on moved it to animation folder. I created a trigger parameter called time in player animation controller. I transferred animation name that to the player animation controller. I created a transition between any state and this animation. I defined the dying trigger parameter in the transition. I opened the player movement script. I wrote my animator set trigger dying in the die method. I turned on game mode and when player touched the enemy, the death animation worked as I wanted. To give a more impressive death effect, I made the player jump into the air when he died. For this, I assigned an upward vector value to velocity in the die method. I created a tile map called hazards tile map. I created a layer named hazards and a sorting layer and transferred them to this tile map. I chose the sprite. I adjust physics shape from the sprite editor. Then I transferred it to tile map and added tile map collider hazards tile map. With the hazards tile map selected in the tile plate, I added spike sprite to various areas on the screen. In the player movement script in the die method, I wrote hazards next to the enemy's expression I wrote before and selected the trigger of the hazards tile maps in tile map collider. When I started the game, I saw that the player died the moment it touched the spike. By the way, we no longer need to use the water tile map we created before. If we move the water sprite in the tile palette to the screen with hazards tile map selected. In game mode, when the player touches the water, he will die just like touching the spike. I opened the player prefab. I added the capsule sprite inside, made it horizontal, reduced its size to the point where it could be a bullet, and positioned it at the player's hands level. I made the layer bullets and the sorting layer player. I only selected player from the collision matrix of the bullets layer from physics 2D. I changed the name of the capsule object to gun and created a prefab named bullet for this object. I added a game object named a bullet and a transform named gun to the player movement script. I created a method called onFire that depends on the input system and wrote instantiate bullet gun position transform rotation in it. I moved the player subobject to gun transformation in the script and the bullet prefab to bullet game object. I replaced transform rotation with gun rotation. When I switched to game mode and pressed the left mouse button, I saw that the bullet instantiated. I made the gun invisible, I added rigid body to bullet prefab, set the gravity scale to 0 and added capsule collider. I created a script called bullet. I called rigid body in it and valued its velocity. Then I added the bullet script to the bullet prefab as a component. When I switched to game mode, I saw that when the bullets are instantiated, they travel at the speed I set. I created a variable called bullet speed and gave it the value of 20. Then I wrote this variable to the x parameter of the vector. Then when I switched to game mode, I saw that bullet went faster. I called player movement class in the bullet script. I created a float variable called xSpeed. I multiplied the x scale value in player's transform with bullet speed and transferred it to x speed so that bullet will go in the direction player is facing. And I replaced x speed with bullet speed. When I switched to game mode, I saw that whichever direction player looked, the bullet went in that direction. I created an onTriggerEnter method in the bullet script and added if other tag equals enemy, destroy other game object. I created a tag named enemy and assigned it to enemy object. When I start playing the game, when I fired, the enemy would disappear when the bullet hit enemy. Bullet script private void on collision enter to the collision order, destroy game object I wrote, and when I switched to game mode, bullets were now destroyed when they hit something. I created 3 sections from the scene sections. I added the exit sprite to scene. I reduced the size by half. I created a lawyer named Interactables and assigned it to the exit object. I added box collider to the exit and selected is trigger. I made the exit object prefab. I created a script called levelator and assigned it to the exit object as a component. I transferred all levels to build settings one by one. I opened the level exit script. I added the scene management library. I wrote private void onTriggerEnter to the other int current scene index equals scene manager get active scene build index scene manager load scene current scene index plus 1. I switched to game mode. Now the player can go to the next level when he comes to exit portal. I moved the code I wrote on trigger to the load next level method I newly created and set the code in this method to run 1 second later. I called load next level with start coroutine in the onTrigger method. I switched to game mode and now the player was moving to the next level 1 second after pressing exit. I applied the exit prefab to other levels. It worked fine until last level, but it gave an error at last level. Because the levels were in an array and the index increased gradually and came to the end. It gave an error because the last index was not in the array. To fix this issue, if next scene index equals scene manager scene count in build settings, next scene index equals 0, I wrote the code block and the problem was fixed. I created an object called GameStation. I created a script called GameStation. I assigned the GameStation script to the GameStation object as a component and opened the GameStation script. I replaced start with awake. I wrote to prevent more than one game session from occurring in section. I wrote in num-game sessions equals find objects of type game session length. If num-game sessions greater than 1, destroy game object as don't destroy on load game object. I created a variable called player lives. I wrote a method called process player death and wrote 2 methods inside it. The first one is called take life and will be called as long as player lives is greater than 1, and the other one, the reset game session, will be called when player lives is less than 1. Into take life player lives minus int current skin index equals scene manager get active scene build index. Scene manager load scene current scene index. I wrote. Scene manager load scene 0. Destroy game object. I wrote. Add find object of type game session. Process player that to player moves to players moves die method. I wrote. I made game session prefab and transferred it to level 2. I added spikes to level 2. I turned on game mode and went from level 1 to 2. After touching spike and dying 3 times, the player returned to level first. When the bullets fired by the player touch the exit, the player moves on to the next level. To solve this problem, I put the start creating statement in the level script into if other tag equals player block. I created an object called pickups and transferred coins back into it and made players interactable. I added circle collider to the and selected this trigger. I selected all sprites on the coin sheet and created an animation called coin spin. I chose the loop time of the coin spin. I created an animator controller named coin. I transferred coin spin to the controller. I added an animator component to the coin object and I moved the coin animator to controller section. When I switched to game mode, the coin animation was working properly. I created a script called coin pickup and assigned the coin object as a component. I opened the script into private void on trigger enter to the collider to the other. If other tag equals player, destroy game object I wrote, and when the player touched the coin in game mode, the coin disappeared. I selected on the player from physics to the collision matrix. I made the coin prefab and I multiplied it. In game mode, player collected them all the way I wanted. I moved the coin sound file to the sounds folder. I added the audio source to coin. I removed play on awake. I opened the coin pickup script, serialized field, audio clip, coin pickup SFX, audio source, play clip at point, coin pickup SFX, camera mean, transform position I wrote. I went to Unity and transferred the coin sound file, coin pickup SFX. When I entered game mode, the sound effect was working properly when the player received the coin. I added canvas. I added text mesh pro into it. I named it leaves text. I put an anchor in the upper left corner of the canvas. I set the canvas UI scale mode to the scale with screen size. I moved the font to fonts folder. I opened font as creator. I assigned the font to source font file and dragged it and I did generate. I moved the new font to font asset of leaves text and the new font appeared on the screen. Then I made the font size and other settings. Copy the live text. I made the new copy score text. I anchored it to the upper right edge and I aligned the text to the right and expanded it. I select input system in the event system. I opened game session script and created two values named leaves text and score text. I passed live text and score text objects to it. Inside the start method, leaves text equals player leaves to string I wrote. When I started the game, it said 3 on leaves text. I wrote the same line of code in take life. But when I lost the life in game mode, live text was not changed as I wanted. For this, all I had to do was move the canvas object under game session. And leave text worked fine. I created a score variable for score text and initially transferred its value to score text. I wrote public void add score int points to add score plus equals points to add score text equals score to string. I opened the coin pickup script and I wrote serialized field int points for coin pickup equals 100 for find object of type game session at score points for pickup. I turned on game mode and saw that the scoreboard was working. But there is a problem. Sometimes I see an incorrect result on the scoreboard because the player buys the coin twice. To prevent this, I wrote coin pickup. A bool was collected equals false, was collected equals true, game object set active false. When I lose a life, I go back to the beginning of the level. But the coins I collect and the enemies I kill also come back. I will talk about the way I follow to prevent this. I created an object and script called scene persist. I collected all coins and the enemies under this object. I copied the awake method from game session and passed it into scene persist. And I arranged code according to scene persist. The problem seems to be solved when I switch game mode. But there is another problem. When I move on to other levels or return to the beginning of the game, scene persistence continues and I do not want to such a thing. For this, add public void reset scene persist to scene persist script. I wrote destroy game object, find object type, scene persist, reset scene persist. I wrote. I also wrote same statement in the load next level method of the level exit script. I deleted the last two levels, copy level first. I restarted the last two levels. I restarted the game and scene persistence was working fine. By the way, I also made a large version of coin that gives more points with the prefab variant. My game is basically complete. If you want, you can improve your own game by watching this video and make it more exciting by adding features such as new types of enemies, traps, levels with varying difficulty levels, and time limits. If you want to publish the game commercially, you must purchase the rights to use the assets from the asset store. By the way, the usage rights of the assets do not belong to me, or you can replace it with other assets. If you like my video, don't forget to like my video, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Take care until the next video.